ready to nerd out on some comp stuff? This is my life. Thanks for all coming here today. If you notice, the title of my slides here are actually slightly different than the title of the session. This is Demystifying Compensation Philosophy. Before it's demystifying compensation strategy. The reason why I did that here is because comp philosophy is the foundation to any comp strategy. And really knowing the hows and the whys behind comp philosophy is really going to help you guys when it comes to your comp strategy. This is something that we're going to really sort of double click on. But also, throughout this presentation, feel free to, as questions come up, interject. You can save them for the Q&A. Any questions that highly specific to you and your company that I should be scared to ask on the spot, feel free to ask those on the spot, and I'll do my best. All right. All right, so a little bit about today. We are going to be covering philosophy, what it is, why you should care about it, how you should think about it, and then get a little bit more tactical on some of the outputs of comp philosophy and strategy, which is job architecture and equity. And this is where you might have some questions more specific to sort of contextually your own companies and where you work and what you want to do. And then we're going to back out to comp philosophy and talk about communication as well as how philosophy is going to evolve over time within your company as you scale and grow, and hopefully have some time at the end for some Q&A. All right, let's see how this thing works. All right, so just a little bit about my company, where I work, and myself. I work at Sequoia Group. Sequoia is a business that's been around for 22 years or so in the HR services space. We really work with the sort of top high growth tech and life sciences firms, really from pre-seed all the way to fully functioning 20,000 person public companies. And we really do this through what we call total people investment. We cover all elements of your people spend, from benefits to comp, retirement, well-being. And we do it via kind of three main pillars. It's our consulting side, which I'm a part of, and our compensation consulting practice. We also offer various outsourcing capabilities, some in the form of a PEO, similar to sponsor here, JustWorks, and also in various co-sourcing capacities, being sort of just an extension of your team. And it's all kind of buttoned up through our software platform, where we have sort of an HR facing side of our platform, or a leadership side of our platform for decision making, analysis, as well as a employee side facing side of our platform. And me, I am a QR code. So I am, this is just a link to my LinkedIn. Trying to be trendy here. So I have been in the compensation space my entire career, born and raised in it. And I spent about 10 years at a company called Radford, which is a compensation consulting firm, primarily focusing in executive comp and equity strategy, but found my way working with largely startups and sort of growing them through IPO and beyond. And for that reason, really assisting them with all things comp, broad-based sales comp, exec comp, equity, all of the above. And also have spent some time in-house running total rewards at a Bay Area biotech. And here at Sequoia, similar capacity, helping clients in the world of compensation. So let's get into it here. All right. Sorry, as I get my notes situated here. All right, so I'm going to start with and really drill into what comp philosophy is, as I was saying at the beginning, and why you should care about it. The reason I'm focusing on this is because, although many have an idea of what comp philosophy is, it's kind of an overused term, to be honest. And in my experience, people don't really fully appreciate or really know all the elements of comp philosophy and its impact on so many things downstream. And so I'm hoping that sort of knowing the why and the how here can really help you guys, as after this session, sort of self-assess and self-solve for some of the issues that you have that are a bit more tactical that come after comp philosophy, because comp philosophy is a major tool for solving any type of issue as it relates to compensation. So, as I was mentioning, comp philosophy, well, it's pretty much the most rushed through or glazed over or even flat out ignored element of any total rewards program. And this goes from seed stage companies, pre-seed stage companies, all the way through some Fortune 500 companies as I work with. You will see oftentimes comp philosophy stop at, well, we target the 50th percentile, and that's it. And that's not really getting you anywhere. That's somewhere it's not really getting you anywhere. So hopefully we can go into a bit more than just where we target in the market today. So what actually is compensation philosophy? So I define compensation philosophy as a set of guiding principles that sort of outlines your approach to rewarding employees and really how you value employees. There's kind of a leadership side to comp philosophy and an employee experience side of comp philosophy. On the leadership side, I really see it as your North Star. You are going to come, tons and tons of difficult questions are going to come your way as the company evolves. And you're going to get to a point where in a lot of those decisions, there is no one right answer. And the only thing that you can look back to is your compensation philosophy when it comes to people decisions and compensation decisions. And if you have done the work up front to align, gain consensus and agreement on what that comp philosophy is, then you have that to fall back on and to give you direction to making those decisions. So that's the real sort of North Star aspect of comp philosophy. On employee side, it's something for them to buy into from the very beginning and to believe in. And that's really a critical part to sort of the marriage between employee and company. From the beginning, when you're recruiting someone and they ask compensation questions or really just HR oriented questions, if you are able to effectively communicate your compensation philosophy and attach it to your cultural philosophies and your cultural values, that's really going to help the employee buy in and really sort of have a better understanding of how they're going to be valued from the beginning and really even through exit in their entire employee life cycle. All right, so again, to sort of double click and maybe get a bit more tactical here as to why comp philosophy is so important. It's like building a house. It begins with that solid foundation. In the comp world, your foundation is your comp philosophy. This can really help us build things like what's often actually in our comp world thought of as sort of your second foundation, your job architecture. Job architecture is a way to sort of categorize, level, value employees systematically in your organization, which then helps you create policies and practices, which then helps you create process and procedure. And this is all to help build sort of a holistic program that is compliant, transparent, and efficient. So again, all starts at philosophy flowing through to job architecture and the system that you're managing your people by, those policies and processes that are associated with that comp philosophy. And then sort of taking a step back out. So yes, philosophy can help you develop those systems and policies and procedures, but really, what does it do? So there is the philosophy development aspect of comp philosophy. This involves consensus building, alignment, buy-in, and clarity. That process in and of itself is just a good exercise at the leadership level to learn how to create consensus and alignment on all things, not just comp. Um, but once you've done that upfront work, then you have the ability to give direction, diagnose issues, not just identifying them, but diagnosing issues and why they're happening, and then predict outcomes with your various proposed resolutions. In the end, it really just helps you sort of get stuff done. And that's the most valuable aspect of it all. And to put a fine point on this, and I'm really grilling this into you about how important comp philosophy is, but to put a fine point on it, if comp philosophy is the foundation of our people decisions, of our structures and systems, practices and policies, process and procedure, and it just helps us get stuff done, well, then philosophy really becomes the center of so many different things in our organization, directly or indirectly, from your equity strategy to your cap table to your dilution management to your next round of financing. It really is the beginning of so many different areas, to your incentives and how you reward people and your cash runway and your revenue. Again, sort of the center of it all. And if this wasn't a PowerPoint, I made a lot of effort to make really cool animations for this slide, and I can't do it because it's PDF. But LinkedIn me, I'll send you the PowerPoint, and you guys can see for yourselves. Pretty cool. Again, I'm just trying to be hip. All right, so how should we think about comp philosophy? How should we think about it, and really, how should we go about building one? Get a little more technical here. So, key design inputs when creating a comp philosophy. First and foremost, always led by company goals and objectives. And by this, I truly do mean your top line objectives, your revenue goals, your R&D goals, your headcount goals. Where do you want to be in a year, 2 years, 3 years? Long range planning. That's at the end of the day, that's what really matters is those goals. So we want to make sure your comp philosophy is supporting those. And I can't tell you how many times, I have a conversation with a company talking about their goals and where they're at with their philosophy, and those things are not married at all. And in fact, they're completely working against each other. And not that they're knowingly doing that, but that just sort of inherently happens all the time, because they don't take the upfront time to sort of double click on things here. Another critical input here is stakeholder interviews. You can call this whatever you want. Getting to know what critical stakeholders believe when it comes to compensation at your firm. And for me, and in my role, I spent a lot of time with the ELT and the board, understanding their perspectives. Ultimately, they're sort of the key decision makers when it comes to this. But certainly, the company should be doing their groundwork, understanding how employees feel about the current state of comp and the philosophy, which may be little to nothing, and where they would like to see it go. Next, gathering market data to understand norms and kind of what is typical. This is going to vary in terms of how important this becomes for you, because some firms some founders, some decision makers may just not care what the market does. I can tell you, I get that a lot. Ultimately, you're going to need to care to some extent. But just gathering market data, there's various sort of means for doing that, and we can kind of get into that as well. but having that just baseline norm for your leaders and for yourself, for obvious reasons, is critically important. And then understanding your current issues and your current talent demographic. Your obviously the issues that are at play are going to go a long way to informing, okay, well, what are we doing wrong? We need to solve for that. And your talent demographic. Today, if you're hiring a bunch of people straight out of college, or you're going into the next stage where you're hiring a bunch of player coaches, that's going to be an input into how you should be thinking about your comp philosophy. If you have a truly diverse workforce in many sort of definitions of the word, that's going to influence how you think about constructing your comp philosophy. That's, or should be at the very least. And then lastly, your company values. I said it before. Your comp philosophy should marry into your company values, support it, don't work against it, really be able to live your comp philosophy. And then key design outputs. So a big and beneficial one is a clear understanding of the intention of your rewards program. And that goes for everyone at the company, employees upon hire, employees in their performance reviews and their comp reviews, your leadership team when big comp decisions are being made, your board when you come to one of these big strategic questions or decision points that there is no quite one good answer. If you know the intention of your rewards program, that's going to go a long ways to helping you make those decisions. And then differentiation. So I don't mean this solely in the form of differentiation often is attached to pay for performance, and certainly it is. But having a comp philosophy and having a job architecture attached to that allows you to really, and this is really important when you sort of scale and become bigger than just one page on a spreadsheet, allows you to differentiate the organization from an analytical perspective. Say who should be eligible for what types of programs, to analyze your people investment spend across the business. You need to be able to differentiate between, in a system, between a support level employee versus a professional individual contributor role versus a manager, player, coach, all of the above. And then additionally, your buy-in, as I've kind of already mentioned, another key output of comp philosophy in the process, consistency in decision making, your pay for performance, and pay equity. Pay equity not just in the terms of compliance with the ever-evolving laws that are out there across the country, but just in the name of fairness, which is typically and frankly should be a part of most people's philosophy these days.
Hey, Zach, we have a virtual question.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
From Elizabeth Meager. What is an example of when goals and comp philosophy work against each other?
When goals and comp philosophy work against each other. So a goal could be to so at the board level, there's oftentimes a sort of mandate to conserve shares in some form, conserve dilution, conserve your burn rate. It's all different ways of saying the same thing effectively. And that is going to be counter to the all-in ownership mentality that is very much so a part of a lot of early stage startups. It's not going to completely sort of roadblock it, but you're going to have to say, okay, we really believe that every person in this company should be an owner in this company, not just now, but into the future when we're 100 employees, 200, 300, 400, 500. And you're going to continuously going to have to sort of prove why you should still do that and show how you can still do that, even with the board saying, no, this year we've got to lower your burn rate from 4 to 3%, or you've only got X many shares to work with this year. That's just something I can think of on the spot, but I'm sure there's many else out there. Any other questions? Good. All right. Cool. All right. So to double click a bit further, the messiest design processes are those that don't start with taking inventory of what constraints you're working with. There's always going to be a sort of dynamic push and pull between your constraints and your philosophy. And this actually kind of gets into what I was just talking about. And they can change based on many factors, both within and out, that are both within and out of your control. For this reason, philosophy design isn't really a one-time process. It's going to be ever evolving based on things that are both, again, in your control and not. So growth of the company, you like to think is sort of in your control for the most part, but broader macroeconomic dynamics is not. And so revisiting your philosophy becomes part of the normal sort of comp process, if you will. Just by way of example, as I was just saying, investors' dilution tolerance, this is largely going to be influenced by the context of their investment. So private equity firms or a bootstraps organization, they're typically going to have a lot tighter dilution constraints, a lot less use of equity across the organization. And the leaders, if, again, owned by a PE firm, the partners at the PE firm, they're going to come in to negotiations with that bias. So that is a constraint on how you might be able to live your philosophy that you want to live. Conversely, VC firms, VC-backed companies tend to be a lot more generous, largely related to the context of their investment and what they're trying to get out of it. Likewise, in a bull market, you might be able to be a little more aggressive with your spend. It's kind of interesting these days what I'm seeing sort of real time, going from a world where you may come to a decision where you're thinking about reducing your equity guidelines because it's just kind of getting a little stretched. And whereas before, the answer may have been, let's not reduce it. It's not a big deal. I'd rather not take that risk in terms of recruiting people or attention. Now it's not that much. Let's just cut it. It'll be fine. We need those shares. That's sort of real-time experience of how macroeconomics can impact your sort of constraints and your philosophy. All right. And then sort of a second double click here that I want to make is, and something that you could literally on your ride home today, just start thinking about, is how you view the different compensation tools that are out there. The vast majority of companies out there are thinking, whether they know or not, they are thinking about or using each element of pay, most common elements, salary, bonus, equity, in the same exact way. These elements of pay are different elements of pay for a reason. If you just, little sort of history lesson here, way back there was no bonus, there was no equity, there's just salary. So you had merit increases because that was the way you injected some form of performance into your salary. Then came bonuses. That is a direct way to reward for past performance, bonuses. Yet the sort of common practice of merit increases stuck. And then you get to the day and age when equity becomes a thing and everyone is an owner. And what ends up happening with equity is that, yeah, you're granted equity upon hire, but also the people that get more equity are the high performers that are rewarded for past performance. And if you can see, each one of those things are being used pretty much in the same way, more or less. But as a matter of fact, and this is where a bit of opinion comes into play, but I believe, each one of these tools in your toolbox can be used powerfully in different ways. Salary to pay fairly for the role that the person is in, and that's just that. You need to have table stakes salary, fair pay coming in the door. To motivate and to reward for performance, bonus. And then to retain your employees and to really focus on longer term strategic thinking, that's where equity comes into play. So if you have that belief with equity, which is a common one, then why are you basing how much equity gets based on what they did last year and not what you think they need to do or can do next year? People are going to have different opinions about that stuff, but it's just sort of something, again, on your ride home, start thinking about. All right. This slide's kind of more of a take home, but the point is that your compensation philosophy should ultimately end in a statement of its key elements, some of which are here, and some of these are just examples. But you should be able to trace each one of your statements back to the beginning of your design process, and this is a really critical litmus test for whether you've done your comp design correctly, because this means that your comp philosophy is defensible, and this means that the other leaders in your organization can defend it, and they will have to defend it over time at so many different points in an employee's life cycle. Again, from hire through exit. So that just sort of notion of being able to trace each one of these back to its individual parts is a really sort of critical element here. Yeah.
Sharing comp ranges and
Mm.
kind of postings require a range.
Yep.
Any news on whether or not, like, what is your experience with startups actually? What is your experience with startups sharing salaries of everyone or broad salary ranges? I mean, there's definitely a pro and a con. I'm an HR guy. There's a pro and a con to doing that. I'm just curious what you see in earlier stage startup companies.
It's scary as hell for HR guys. So my advice there would be, it's not going away. It's only going to get stronger in terms of these regulations. And I have some nitpicky issues with a lot of the way some of these rules are designed and whatever. But the spirit of them is that you should have in place a defensible comp philosophy and compensation system, and you should be able to feel good about sharing this with your employees. Is it going to open up a can of worms in some instances? I mean, a lot of instances, yep, probably, especially in the first couple of years. But at the end of the day, what it takes to have a competitive program outside of pay transparency, a competitive program, all those core sort of work steps that go into that are pretty much the same as what it takes to have a clear and transparent compensation program. So you should be doing that work anyways. Now the communication aspect of it is, yes, a whole other ball game, and it's hard. But I will tell you that the vast majority of clients, from early to late to public, are all not thinking like, how can we resist this or do the minimum? It's how can we really lean into this? Because we know we're going to have to regardless. Answer your question. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Absolutely.
I have a question too. When you are kind of structuring your comp philosophy and you're a company that's obviously a startup, as most of us are, and you're trying to conserve cash, how do you design a comp philosophy that is motivating to employees without a ton of cash?
Mhm.
And then side question to that is it okay to give employees a set of guidelines and allow them to design their own comp package?
So, okay. So the first part, um, whether because you're an early company and you just don't have much cash runway and you need to conserve cash, or you're a late stage company that is needing to probably maybe lay off some employees and overall just rein in the cash spend. The key there is sort of transparency and rationale. Um, Particularly in your situation that you're describing, there's such a clear reason why, yes, we're not going to pay like Google. We cannot do that. Now, on the other side of it is sort of more, I guess, tactically is you can have a much more generous equity program for the time being. And when it comes to switch that back to more competitive cash compensation, if you've done the work up front to say, this is the rationale why we have a very competitive equity program. Times have changed. We're actually bringing in revenue now. We might even be a public company. This is why we're kind of changing that a little bit, and it makes it a little smoother. Although everyone's always going to want the best of both worlds. And on the second point, which was around disclosing ranges to your employees, was it? Yeah. So, I mean, you've seen that here and there with some pretty big name companies. For example, Netflix has they basically have an all-in value number, and then the employee is allowed to say, this is how much I want in cash, and this is how much I want in equity. Super cool. Really, really hard to administer. And it creates an environment of winners and losers that I personally wouldn't touch for a company that I was working for. Again, I mean, you can be bold and do stuff like that. It's worked for Netflix, and I would argue it's worked for Netflix because there's been nothing but good for the most part at Netflix. But there's plenty of other companies where there's nothing but bad, and that type of program only accentuates the bad. So tread lightly with something like that. Yes.
Question online from Barbara. Any advice on comp philosophy for consultants that are working with startups where the startup can't pay them cash when it's early on?
Oh man. Oh man. So I'd always love to have been paid equity back in like 2013 when everything was shooting up the thing. But so the questions around how can they work with companies to help? So actually just last week, I think it was, I got in contact with a company that was pretty early stage, not ready for comp consultant. They don't need that. I know they don't need that. But they had no idea how to even just start and think about philosophy. So I literally just went to a coffee shop with them for 2 hours and said, what are your questions? And here's how I think about comp philosophy, essentially a more detailed version of what we're talking about today, because this is the foundation and tool for you to get to the next step. At which point in time, and yeah, you're not paying me. This is all pro bono. Like this is what you need to get to the next step. At which point you're gonna need me. Then that's how I think about that.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's say that you have a new comp philosophy, and how would you advise the transition from your old to new? Would you change it for everybody all around, or certain people are grandfathered in?
So you have an old one and you're thinking about installing a new one,
Yeah.
if you will. So it just kind of depends contextually, but generally, I would say no. It's sort of moving everyone to the new philosophy. That doesn't mean, for instance, like if part of that is around bonus targets, and it would imply that certain employees would receive a reduction in their bonus target. Um, those instances are commonly where you would grandfather stuff. But overall, the just general look and feel of your philosophy and where you're targeting in the market and sort of how you're making decisions, that should all be part of sort of new code, if you will. If that makes sense.
Back to the, oh, sorry. I was going to go back to the previous question and just say that a piece of advice that my accountant gave to me a long time ago was he said, when you're working with a startup from the consultant's perspective, when you're working with a startup, make sure that they give you some cash so that they value your time and realize how much time they're asking of you. And then as a consultant, you can say, well, you clearly have a good idea, so I'm willing to work for X amount of equity. And doing the converse might be good for a startup.
Yeah, absolutely. I've never been in an environment where I can actually do that and work for equity, because I've worked for bigger companies and all that good stuff, but absolutely agree. That's good advice.
Maybe just 2 comments just to follow on that. I'm working with a small seed stage 10-person company. I'm kind of proposing a % ownership guideline. And if they're going to bring in a, C-level executive at 1 or 2%, and they're going to bring in a fractional consultant at 1 day a week, I'm just proposing they grant like that 1/5 of whatever that equity would be, just and cash, just so you're kind of like buying your way into that. But that's an approach I take at small companies.
Yeah,
Cash and like a fractional
Yeah.
equity grant. And then just the other one on the grandfathering. Been through lots of comp changes and M&As and takeovers by big pharma. For me, I think it's not so much about. There's a little bit of grandfathering. It's just giving people heads up, right? The bonus. Tell people 6 months ahead of time that this is going to change. Give them time to prepare. Cash. Explain why there's equal value, and I take the do no harm philosophy. Like I've taken away equity, but then explained to people why higher salary or higher bonus kind of makes up for that. And I think as long as you give people a runway and explain the rationale and don't kind of pull the rug out, I think just giving it time in advance helps those transitions.
Yeah. I mean, not to drill down on it too much, but I was just working with a client where their philosophy, not really by choice, is being much more moved to heavy equity because they're having no merit increases, no bonus payouts, and they're actually moving their 401k match from being every single paycheck to the end of the year with vesting. So that's all takeaways from a cash perspective, but do no harm adding in additional equity coincident with when those changes are communicated. It makes up for it in some form. Yes. Oh.
Hello.
Hello.
I was wondering how you compensate people who've been around at the company for a while versus a new employee at the same level. So to reward those who stay around. So imagine, I don't know, a senior engineer, I don't know, level 1, whatever you want to call it. He's been around the company for 5, 6, 10 years versus a new person comes in at the same level. Would they be compensated the same? And if not, how do you deal with that? Because most of the time on the leadership front, they have a band of compensation for each level. And they often, from what I've seen, have the employees' salary increase at a few percent a year kind of increase. And in order to attract new people, they often end up paying more for these new employees coming in, which now goes against the existing employees. And so just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm taking it in sort of 2 parts, the salary and the equity part. So let's say you're a couple years down the road, you have an engineer that was one of the first employees, highly valuable, highly tenured. And you now hire someone in the same exact role, their peers. In the ideal world, that original engineer's equity is going to be representative of the value that they've brought to the company from day one and the risk they took from the day one. That sort of emphasizes the importance of getting comp philosophy and equity strategy sort of right from the beginning. On the salary side, that is, a tale that is old as time in terms of bringing in new people that might demand higher salaries than a longer tenured employee. And that's where annually we have market adjustments we call them, generally speaking, where you can take the time to sort of adjust pay based on inequities, either due to market conditions or situations like that. But typically you would.
Sorry, you have employees in Silicon Valley who started off, right out of college at $100,000 salary, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
But now they're like $200,000-$300,000. It's not an easy compensation adjustment you can do. So do you increase the pay for all the existing employees, which is a massive hit, or do you do it on a case by case basis, or
Sure.
how do you're competing with the market as well as internally?
Yeah. So another aspect of all that is you're not, as a startup, it's not your job to compete directly with the comp philosophy of Google. You won't be able to. So part of the hiring process is to communicate to employees why you aren't going to compete with the comp philosophy of Google, and they're not going to pay that salary. Here's why. Many, many good reasons why. In a down market, that conversation gets a little bit easier because employer leverage is a little bit higher. Right? It's been certainly challenging over the years, hence the sort of acceleration of pay. But at the end of the day, employees are going to want to have their cake and eat it too. It's your job to describe why that's just not possible, and also why that's still fair. Because if you don't, you're going to end up with the situation you just described. You're going to have, engineers making $300K at a startup, which makes just no sense.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes. So talking about performance, what's your thought about how to have a good balance between individual performance with KPIs or companies' performance, which of course do not depend necessarily on the individual, and especially as the startup grows and evolve?
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you, like the sort of norms around bonus plan design and all that. I mean, a lot of startups just won't have them, which is totally fine. I mean, it's because you can deal with managing performance at an individual level, and it's not, you can't really hide in a startup in terms of performance. But if you do have one, and a lot of times it'll come sort of either very late stage private or certainly coincident with an IPO, there's most companies will have sort of a weighting system where, let's say at the C-suite level, 80% of bonus is going to be tied to corporate performance. Conversely, sort of at the entry levels, 80% of pay is going to be tied to individual performance. And that all makes sense intuitively. The hard part is sort of actually administering that. That's when it becomes less about comp and more about performance management systems, which is sort of tangential to all of this. But yeah, I would just say try to build it into your comp framework, that performance management in a weighted example.
So thank you. This is more of like a comment and answer to some of the questions as well. But as the head of developer relations at Fraction, we actually do leverage fractional talent for a lot of companies. And one of the things that startups have been able to do is compete with and get engineers from Google, Netflix, and Facebook at a fractional capacity to come in 20 to 30 hours a week and help build their platforms and also help with the speed of delivery that a startup needs. So oftentimes what people will do is start them off fractionally, sometimes double up on fractional resources, or be able to convert that fractional engineer full time. Once they've embedded into the startup, they have a better taste for the culture, a better taste for the environment and what it's going to be like. And then you can pair that with higher equity to bring, to again, emphasize on the key value that they bring to the organization. So while it is challenging for startups to balance both, it is a good approach and a new way that you can bring those key players onto the team too.
Helps both sides test drive, sort of. Good. Any other questions?
We've got one from online. What is your opinion on employees sharing with other employees what their comp is? And then what should the policy be from the company about sharing comp?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it scares me when they do every time, but they should feel free to do that. I mean, they're human beings, you know, they can talk about whatever they want to talk about when it comes to their own compensation. And frankly, in the spirit of compliance and regulation and just pay transparency and pay equity, you should have stuff set up so that if they're talking about it, it's not that inflammatory. That's kind of, if it is inflammatory, that's not on them, that's kind of on you.
Mass Equal Pay Act actually provides that
Yeah.
you cannot do. The Mass Equal Pay Act provides that you cannot take any retaliation for employees talking, sharing. So like my assumption, everybody shares their salaries. It's just like it or not.
Yep. That's exactly. Assume everyone talks. No, exactly. It is, yes.
We've seen a whole lot of disruption. Startup is a disruptive industry, and startups, as in their areas, tend to come in to disrupt something more established that isn't moving and evolving at the speed at which the technology we now have can move it along. And that is true now for the workforce as well. Workforce is a lot more of a consumer and understands is beginning to understand its value to companies of all kinds. For too long, one things that traditional companies have been very slow to move on is recognizing that the workforce itself, typically 70 to 75% of a company's budget, an operating expense, that's their investment.
Yep.
That you don't get an RO, that's your investment, that's your ROI. Your profit is your ROI on your initial investment, which is your workforce. Garbage in, garbage out. So if your compensation philosophy is garbage or non-existent, if you treat people like they are expendable, which again, for so long, that has gotten out of hand for companies. And we now see a very disrupted workforce that is a lot more savvy and has the tools at their disposal to understand their value, to understand what ROI they provide a company, to leverage that, to speak on that. That should be welcomed by companies. That is, you're nothing without customers. You're nothing without your employees first. You're not a company without employees. So shifting that mindset at the company level to welcoming those conversations, even though they're tough, that's critical importance. And it baffles me that companies are still companies that dare to put it in writing, because it's simply, if you can have a bad mentality, but don't say the quiet part out loud. If you're,
Right.
Don't be stupid about it if you're going to be an exploitative company. But it is a difficult conversation, and companies, that's something that should be disrupted. Companies at all levels should be welcoming those conversations and feeling that disruption and building it in by design better. I think.
Absolutely. 100%. That's why having a good comp philosophy, it's going to help you. It's all back to the comp philosophy. How much time do we have?
5 minutes.
5 minutes? 5 minutes. Okay. I wanted to get to this only because I feel like companies here might value it. It's straying a little away from comp philosophy and more into sort of trends. But this is just sort of talking about the evolution of equity strategy from early to late stage. What's not on here is kind of public, but this is the norms in the market, and also inherently tends to be how philosophically companies will think about equity depending on their size and stage. So at the early stages, when we talk about philosophy and approach, we really think about equity as something that is it's non-tangible. You can't really prescribe a value to it. Sure, you've just raised your next round, your seed round, your A round, whatever. Can you really prescribe a value to it that you can stand behind? Debatable. So a lot of times equity is focused on, well, for one, defined as granting a percent of the company, percent ownership in the company. And the communication of it is focused on the potential and the opportunity you have. It's like being given, one or many lottery tickets that you can't scratch off yet. And you're saying, by giving 2 lottery tickets to every engineer I hire, we're giving them equal opportunity to this sort of undefined pie in the sky. And as long as you're fair with that opportunity, then you're fair and you're competitive. Conversely, at the later stage, we do have tangible value. Even if you're still a private company, you've got sort of robust revenue coming in. You've got some really well thought through valuations. You've got your preferred, you got your 409A. You really can talk about equity as a value. I am delivering you $100,000 in RSUs. And you can start to sort of communicate equity from a value perspective that then better aligns itself to sort of an all-in total rewards value. That's kind of how philosophy changes at that point. And then in terms of size and frequency, at the earlier stages, you're really thinking about granting equity once upon hire, vesting over 4 years. Some do 3 years now, but still 4 years, the majority practice. And then a large refresh grant after 2 or 3 years post hire, sort of or in line with additional rounds of funding. That happens most often in the sort of life sciences biotech world. True up grants coincident with the financing, and the tech sort of SaaS world, not so much. It does happen, just not as sort of frequently. And of course, though, with every sort of round of financing, you're going to want to revisit those equity guidelines. The later stage in the public world, again, new hire grant upon hire, not quite as big as you would get in the sort of early stages, and more frequent but smaller refreshes. And like, as I said earlier, your guidelines are going to be based largely on a targeted value as opposed to a targeted number of shares or a targeted ownership percentage. And then in terms of how your vehicles are going to change, stock options, it's the name of the game in the early stage. Be careful with your ISOs versus your NSOs. Everyone says ISOs. That's not necessarily the case. If you want to offer early exercise activity to your early employees, could go on for days about that type of stuff. And then at the later stages, particularly, when you're $1 billion plus company, that's when you'll start seeing RSUs being factored in. And if not, then certainly on IPO. And that trend really hasn't changed much with the recent market dynamics. It's still pretty much that. But yeah, wanted to make sure I can get that in. Any questions on equity here or just kind of in general? That tends to be a topic. All right, 1 minute. No. Anything? All right, all set. You're all comp experts now.
Great. That was wonderful. And Zach, you can stick around for maybe 5 minutes for anyone that wants to come up and ask some compensation questions.
I'm done.
Yeah, no, get out of here. All right. No, wonderful. Thank you everyone for